Sit back and enjoy 2 hours of fascinating facts you didn't know. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Let's get started. 1 kilogram of coal produces approximately 3.6 kilowatt hours of heat, while 1 pound of uranium-235 can generate approximately 10.9 million kilowatt hours of heat. Wow! This enormous difference exists because nuclear energy comes from reactions in the nucleus of atoms, which release far greater amounts of energy than chemical reactions, such as combustion. It takes 1.5 hours to make a boiled ostrich egg, in case you ever want to cook one. An ostrich egg can weigh around approximately 3.3 pounds and is roughly equivalent to 2 dozen chicken eggs. Because of its size and its extremely thick shell, it requires much more cooking time. In addition, its shell is so hard that many times a small drill or similar tools are needed to open it without breaking it unevenly. Between 70,000 and 150,000 saffron flowers are needed to obtain approximately 2.2 pounds of pure saffron. Alexander the Great washed his hair with saffron to keep it shiny and orange. Each flower produces only 3 small red stigmas that must be collected by hand, which explains why this spice is one of the most expensive in the world. In 2008, a woman who had been missing for 42 years was found dead while watching television. Because she had died many years earlier, her apartment remained intact as it had been at that time, like a time capsule. The case occurred in London with Joyce Vincent, and in the apartment, there were still unopened Christmas presents and the television turned on. If a vampire fed once a day and turned their victims into vampires who also fed once a day, the entire world population would become vampires in just 1 month. This happens because the number of vampires would double every day, creating extremely rapid exponential growth. At that rate, within a few weeks, the number would even exceed the current world population. The animal rights group PETA claims that cows can suffer humiliation if people laugh at them. The organization has argued that social animals can perceive negative human reactions as signals of threat or stress. Although the concept of humiliation is scientifically debated, there is evidence that human treatment influences the well-being of cattle. There are 4,800 species of frogs in the world, but only one makes the sound croak. It is a species known for producing the classic sound that in many languages is represented as croak, while most frogs emit very different calls that can sound like whistles, buzzing, or chirping. Each species has its own call to attract a mate or mark territory. Human touch can detect something as small as approximately 0.5 millionths of an inch, so do not worry. Neuroscience studies have shown that the fingertips are extremely sensitive to microscopic irregularities on surfaces. Under controlled conditions, people can perceive incredibly small differences when sliding a finger, demonstrating the extraordinary precision of the human nervous system. In Australia, you can buy kangaroo meat in the supermarket. It is also present on restaurant menus. It is a healthier alternative to beef or lamb since it contains only 2% fat. In addition, it is rich in protein and iron, and its consumption is also promoted because kangaroos are very abundant in the country. A newborn giant panda weighs the same as a teacup. At birth, it measures only a few inches and is completely pink, blind, and without the characteristic black and white fur. During the first weeks, it depends entirely on its mother to survive. A common ballpoint pen can write 45,000 words before running out. The ink usually lasts long enough to draw several miles of continuous line, depending on the model. This type of pen uses a small metal ball at the tip that distributes the ink evenly as it moves over the paper. Nintendo had to distribute Super Nintendo consoles at night in Japan as a security measure so they would not be stolen by the Yakuza, the criminal organization of that country. The enormous demand for the console caused long lines in stores, so Nintendo decided to send shipments at dawn to avoid robberies and security problems. The famous mushrooms that Mario eats are based on a mushroom called Amanita muscaria. People who have eaten them in real life claim that they caused a sensation of feeling larger than normal. This red mushroom with white spots is one of the most recognizable in the world and frequently appears in illustrations and stories. However, it is also toxic and can cause hallucinations, nausea, and disorientation if consumed. Giraffes can go longer without drinking water than camels. Much of the liquid they need comes from the leaves they eat, especially from trees such as the acacia. In addition, their bodies use available water very efficiently, and they can go several days without drinking, which is useful in the African savannas where water sources are not always nearby. When you sneeze, almost all the functions of your body stop, even the heart. For that reason, it is impossible to sneeze with your eyes open. Please do not try. During a sneeze, an automatic reaction occurs that involves muscles of the face, chest, and abdomen, and the air can be expelled at very high speed to remove irritants from the respiratory system. The mating of pigs can last quite a long time. In some cases, the reproductive process lasts about 30 minutes. This relatively long period is part of the natural behavior of the species and increases the chances of fertilization. In pig breeding, this aspect is important because a single mating can fertilize numerous eggs, which explains why litters of pigs are often quite large. More Monopoly money is printed each year than real money in the entire world. The popular board game has been produced in enormous quantities for decades, and every new edition includes piles of colorful bills. Because of its global distribution and the many versions of the game, the amount of fictional paper money greatly exceeds the annual printing of many real currencies. If we had the same mortality rate as in the year 1900, more than half of the people in the world today would not be alive. Advances in medicine, vaccines, hygiene, and food supply have greatly reduced infant mortality and increased life expectancy in almost every country. The rhythm of your heartbeat tries to imitate the rhythm of the music you listen to. This phenomenon is known as physiological synchronization and happens because the brain adjusts certain functions of the body to the tempo of sound. That is why fast music can slightly speed up the pulse, while slow music tends to relax it and reduce heart rate. For decades, the song Happy Birthday to You generated millions of dollars in royalties because the company Warner Music Group claimed to own its copyright. It was estimated that it earned around $2 million a year from its use in movies, television, and public events. However, in 2015, a United States court determined that the song actually belongs to the public domain. So since then, anyone can use it freely without paying royalties. Jupiter shrinks by almost 1 inch every year. When it formed, it was twice the size it is now. This process occurs because the giant planet still releases internal heat generated during its formation, which causes it to slowly contract as it radiates energy into space. In fact, Jupiter emits more energy than it receives from the Sun because its interior has been gradually cooling for billions of years. The fan blades of Rolls-Royce jet turbines are so technologically advanced that they cost more than a family car. Each one is made with special alloys capable of withstanding extremely high temperatures and enormous rotational forces. They also must be perfectly balanced and resistant to impacts, such as collisions with birds, which requires very costly engineering and testing processes. The Sun and the Moon appear to be the same size because the Moon is 400 times smaller than the Sun, but it is 400 times closer. This almost perfect coincidence allows total solar eclipses to occur, a phenomenon that is uncommon in the solar system. During these eclipses, the Moon can cover the solar disk with great precision and reveal the Sun's corona, which is normally invisible. The popular slogan, "Keep calm and carry on," was originally created by the British government as a form of propaganda to motivate citizens to remain strong during the Second World War. Later, it became a meme and appeared on humorous shirts. The poster was part of a series designed in 1939 to maintain morale during possible bombings. There are approximately 6,900 languages, but only 20 of them are used by more than half of the world's population. Languages such as Mandarin Chinese, Spanish, English, Hindi, and Arabic concentrate enormous numbers of speakers. Many of the other languages on the planet have very small communities, and several hundred are in danger of disappearing during this century. The German league soccer teams Wolfsburg and Bayer Leverkusen were founded by companies, Volkswagen and Bayer respectively, as training for workers. But they became so good that the companies invested in them and they became professional. The first home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, released in 1972, contained only 40 transistors and had no microprocessor. In comparison, the processor of the Nintendo 64 has 4.6 million transistors. Hitler had a pet crocodile named Saturn that is now 85 years old and lives in the Moscow Zoo. According to the story, the animal was captured during the Second World War and taken to the Soviet Union, where it eventually lived in the zoo of the Russian capital for decades. Pirates almost never looted gold, silver, and jewels. What they looked for were traded goods such as fabrics, animal skins, spices, sugar, dyes, tobacco, cocoa, cotton, and wood. These products were much more common on merchant ships and could be easily sold in ports or colonial markets, which made them a more consistent source of profit than legendary treasures. Singapore is the third richest country in the world, based on gross domestic product per capita. Despite being a small island with few natural resources, its economy grew thanks to international trade, its strategic port, and a strong focus on technology, finance, and education. Today, it is one of the most important financial and logistics centers in Asia. Recently, in an interview, Shigeru Miyamoto admitted that he really likes Disney and that Link is inspired by Peter Pan. That is where the idea that the Kokiri never age came from. Just like the character from the story of Neverland, Link is portrayed as an adventurous boy dressed in green who lives in a forest and embarks on heroic journeys, an aesthetic that helped define the fantastical tone of the series, The Legend of Zelda. The San Francisco cable cars are the only mobile national monuments in the world. These historic vehicles began operating in the 19th century and still travel through the steep streets of the city, serving both as public transportation and as a protected historical attraction. Durham University in Great Britain offers a Harry Potter course that includes the topic Gryffindor and Slytherin, Prejudice and Intolerance in the Classroom. The course analyzes the books of the saga as a way of studying social themes such as discrimination, identity, and the construction of stereotypes. It also compares these elements with historical conflicts and contemporary debates about diversity and inequality. Young Neanderthal women had larger biceps than modern adult men. Studies of their bones show very pronounced muscle attachment points, a sign of intense physical use from an early age. Their daily life involved demanding activities such as carrying firewood, preparing animal skins, and participating in hunting, which developed a much more robust musculature than that of most modern humans. The appearance of the character Eli Vance in Half-Life 2 is based on Larry Herbert, a homeless man the developers found on the street. According to members of the Valve team, they saw him near their offices and were impressed by his appearance. They asked for permission to photograph him and use his face as a reference when creating the character model. After his wife died because the nearest doctor was about 43 miles away, Dashrath Manji, a resident of India, carved a path about 30 feet wide and more than 300 feet long through a mountain. He achieved this in 22 years using only a hammer and a chisel. This path is now the shortest route to reach the city where there are doctors, jobs, and schools. In the world, 4,000 McDonald's hamburgers are eaten every minute, the same number that can be made from one average cow. The chain sells tens of millions of hamburgers every day in thousands of restaurants around the planet, which makes it one of the largest and most influential fast food companies in the world. In the 17th century, there was an anonymous character in London who became famous for a strange prank. He ran through the streets, touching passers-by with a small stick and shouting, "Spanko!" before running away. The incident was so widely talked about at the time that the story is still remembered more than 400 years later. When Space Invaders was released in arcades in Japan, it was so popular that it caused a shortage of 100 yen coins throughout the country. Players formed long lines to use the machines, and many venues had to install more cabinets to meet the enormous demand the game created. In the series Breaking Bad, about 270 people die. Throughout its seasons, the story shows the rise and fall of the character Walter White in a criminal world where confrontations and violent consequences become increasingly frequent. Every 3 seconds, the sun emits more neutrinos than the number of atoms in all the humans who have lived in all of history. These neutrinos are produced during nuclear reactions in the core of the sun and pass through matter almost without interacting with it. Billions pass through the body of every person each second without us noticing. The year on wine bottles is the year when the grapes were harvested, not when the wine was bottled. That year is known as the vintage, and it is important because the weather conditions during that season greatly influence the flavor of the wine. Good weather during the harvest can make a vintage especially valued by collectors. The game Doom was the most installed program in 1995, surpassing even the Windows 95 operating system. Its shareware distribution model allowed millions of people to copy and share it easily, which helped the game spread through universities, offices, and personal computers around the world. In 2009, a film was released that consisted only of paint drawing, created as a response to the popular phrase used by critics, I would rather watch paint dry than watch this movie. It was extremely boring. The work was created as a kind of artistic experiment that played with the patience of the viewer and with the idea of what can truly be considered cinema. The philosopher of ancient Greece, Chrysippus of Soli, died from laughing too much at a joke he invented. According to ancient accounts, he saw a donkey eating figs and ordered that wine be given to it to accompany them. The scene seemed so funny to him that he began laughing uncontrollably, and according to tradition, that laughter ended up causing his death. An obese man managed to smuggle a gun into a jail in the United States by hiding it between folds of his skin, but later confessed everything to the police. The object went unnoticed during the initial search because of its location. However, shortly afterward, the man himself informed the guards, which allowed the weapon to be recovered without a major incident. Guitar hero Aerosmith was not the first game where the American band appeared. In 1994, they starred in a spaceship game called Revolution X, where you had to rescue the musicians in a futuristic dystopia. The game was developed by Midway and originally appeared in arcade machines. Players used weapons that fired compact discs to fight against a regime that had banned music. An average person will spend 6 months of their life waiting for traffic lights to turn green. Although each wait lasts only a few seconds or minutes, when they are added up over the years, they accumulate into a considerable amount of time standing still at intersections. In large cities, where traffic is heavier and daily commutes are longer, this number can be even higher when considering all travel throughout a lifetime. Mr. Potato Head toys from 1952 to 1964 did not include a body. You had to provide your own potato. The toy included only pieces such as eyes, nose, mouth, and hats that were stuck directly into a real potato. Over time, a plastic body was added because the potatoes would rot, and also due to new safety regulations for children's toys. Recording Uptown Funk was so stressful for producer Mark Ronson that he fainted once and vomited 3 times during the process. The song went through numerous versions before its release and was re-recorded several times to perfect the rhythm and arrangements. The effort was worth it, as it ended up becoming one of the biggest hits of the decade. Final Fantasy is called that because it was supposed to be the last game of the company Square, after having gone through difficult times with bad games like Rad Racer or World Runner 3D. The game ended up being an enormous success when it was released in 1987, and not only saved the company, but also gave rise to one of the most famous role-playing series in video games. 1/4 of all the bones in your body are located in your feet. Each foot has 26 bones that work together to maintain balance, absorb impacts, and allow complex movements when walking or running. In addition, the feet also contain more than 100 ligaments and numerous muscles and tendons that help distribute body weight and maintain stability on almost any type of surface. Metrophobia is the fear of poetry. Although it may seem curious, some people experience anxiety when facing poetic texts, especially when they must analyze them or read them in public. The term combines the Greek word for measure or verse with phobia, and it is often mentioned humorously among literature students. Led Zeppelin, REM, and Depeche Mode have never had a #1 single on Billboard. Rihanna has 13. This shows how success on the charts depends greatly on the era and the format of music consumption, since many classic bands sold enormous numbers of albums, even though their singles did not always dominate the charts. Until the 1960s, the only method to know if a woman was pregnant consisted of injecting the woman's urine into an African frog. If she was pregnant, the frog began to ovulate within 12 hours. Thanks, technology. This method worked because the pregnancy hormone triggers that reaction in the species Xenopus laevis. All Fruit Loops taste the same. Although the colors of the cereal are different, the flavor mixture is the same for each piece, something the company itself has confirmed on several occasions. The different colors are mainly used to make the cereal more visually appealing, but the base fruit flavor recipe is identical throughout the cereal. Many people believe they perceive different flavors because the brain often associates different colors with different tastes. A woman named Julia Butterfly lived 738 days in a tree approximately 164 feet tall and about 1,500 years old to prevent it from being cut down. The tree, a giant redwood she named Luna, was in a forest in California threatened by logging. Her protest attracted international attention, and eventually an agreement was reached to protect the tree. The famous Rolling Stones tongue logo was inspired by the tongue of Kali, the Hindu goddess of destruction. The design was created in the early 1970s by the artist John Pasci, who also wanted to reflect the rebellious and defiant attitude associated with Mick Jagger and the band's image. More than 80% of the world's population consumes caffeine in tea, coffee, and sodas daily. This substance acts as a stimulant of the central nervous system and can help reduce the feeling of tiredness. That is why it has become one of the most widely consumed psychoactive compounds on the planet. A study suggests that playing Super Mario 64 causes increases in the regions of the brain responsible for orientation, memory formation, and strategic planning, in addition to improving motor skills. Research with brain scanners has shown that three-dimensional games that require exploring complex spaces can stimulate the hippocampus, an area that is key for memory and spatial navigation. Even though the works of Shakespeare contain more than 1 million words, only 14 words written by him by hand exist. 12 are his signatures, and the other 2 are by and I. Most of his works survived in printed copies or manuscripts written by other people, which is why authentic examples of his personal handwriting are extremely rare. During a Guns N' Roses concert in 1991, Axl Rose saw a fan recording the show and became furious. He ordered security staff to take the camera away, but when they did not do it, he jumped into the crowd to take the camera himself, throwing punches at anyone who got close, then returned to the stage, threw the microphone, and left the concert unfinished, which caused riots that forced police to use pepper spray to disperse the crowd. The amount of water on Earth is constant and continuously recycled over time. That means that the water you drink today could have passed through a dinosaur and come out as dinosaur urine. The water cycle causes the liquid to evaporate, condense, and fall again as rain over millions of years. When the video game Pokémon Stadium began development in 1999, the future president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, analyzed the original battle logic code from Pokémon Red and Blue and devised a way to transfer the code to the Nintendo 64. The original programmer was surprised to see that Iwata understood the complicated system in only 1 week and managed to make it work on a completely different platform. Mila Jovovich and Luc Besson created the divine language for the movie The Fifth Element. By the time the production of the film ended, the two already spoke it fluently. The language was designed with basic grammatical rules and its own vocabulary so that it would sound coherent within the science fiction story. All the members of Nirvana were thrown out of their own Nevermind album release party after starting a food fight. The event was held at a club in Seattle, and the chaos began when the band members started throwing food around the venue, forcing the organizers to end the party earlier than planned. IMAX projectors weigh the same as a hippopotamus. Their bulbs cost $5 million each and are bright enough to be seen from the International Space Station. These machines use enormous optical systems to project extremely sharp images onto giant screens, which allows films to be shown with a level of detail far superior to that of traditional movie theaters. A NASA experiment pays $18,000 to remain in a bed for 70 days. The study is conducted to understand how the human body reacts to the lack of gravity during long space missions. By remaining lying down for so long, scientists can analyze changes in muscles, bones, and circulation. There was going to be a sequel to the movie Gladiator, written by Nick Cave, in which Maximus would reincarnate in Rome, in the Second World War, the Vietnam War, and the Pentagon. Unfortunately, we could not enjoy that cinematic jewel. The script was commissioned by the studio at the beginning of the 2000 decade, but the idea turned out to be too strange, and the project was ultimately never produced. A common violin is normally made from more than 70 individual pieces of wood. Each part fulfills a specific acoustic function and must be assembled with enormous precision. That is why high-quality instruments require many hours of handcrafted work by specialized luthiers. A 5-year-old boy in India fell asleep on a train and ended up lost in Calcutta. 25 years later, he was finally able to find the way back to his home thanks to Google Maps. The boy was named Saru Brierley and spent his childhood without knowing exactly where he came from. Using memories from his childhood and exploring satellite images for years, he managed to identify his town and finally reunite with his biological mother. His story inspired the movie Lion. All documents related to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy were supposed to be made public in 2017, according to a law approved in 1992 after the impact of the film JFK. However, some files remained classified for years for reasons of national security. thousands of documents have gradually been declassified since then, including during the administrations of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, although some still remain partially censored. Bananas produce antimatter at the rate of 1 positron every 75 minutes. This happens because they contain small amounts of the radioactive isotope potassium-40, which, when it decays, can emit positrons. Despite how striking the fact sounds, the amount is so tiny that it represents no risk. The baritone Leonard Warren died on stage in 1960, shortly after finishing the aria Morir, Tremenda Cosa from the opera La Forza del Destino by Verdi. The event occurred at the Metropolitan Opera in New York and left both the audience and the musicians on stage shocked. The muscles that close a crocodile's jaw have the force equivalent to a truck falling from a cliff, but the muscles that open it are so weak that the mouth of a crocodile can be kept closed with a common elastic band. For that reason, some zookeepers can hold its snout shut with tape or with their hands, although doing so is still extremely dangerous. There is no evidence that a relationship exists between sugar and hyperactivity in children. All studies indicate that it is part of a self-induced placebo effect. In many cases, it is adults who expect children to behave more restlessly after consuming sweets. Controlled experiments have shown that when parents believe children consumed sugar, they tend to perceive them as more hyperactive, even when they did not. A statue of Jesus in Ohio, United States, was destroyed in 2010 when it was struck by lightning that caused it to catch fire and collapse. The sculpture was made mainly of flammable materials over a metal structure, which allowed the fire to spread quickly. The event was widely discussed in the media and on social networks. The Doors were the first band to announce a new album on a billboard advertisement. The sign appeared on the famous Sunset Strip in Los Angeles in the 1960s to promote one of their releases. At that time, it was uncommon to use outdoor advertising for rock records, so the strategy attracted a great deal of attention. Uranium is 40 times more common than silver and 500 times more common than gold. Although it is usually associated with rare and dangerous materials, it is actually relatively abundant in the Earth's crust. It is found in small concentrations in rocks, soils, and even in seawater. There is a blue-colored planet where it rains glass about 63 light-years away from the planet Earth. The planet is called HD 1893b, and its extremely strong winds can cause glass particles to move at very high speed through its atmosphere. Scientists believe that winds on that world can exceed several thousand miles per hour, causing those tiny silicate particles to move horizontally as if they were glass rain. It takes 10 times more energy to heat water than to heat steel. This happens because water has a very high heat capacity, which means it can absorb large amounts of heat before increasing its temperature. For that reason, water is frequently used to regulate temperature in industrial systems and in the climate of the planet. At a festival in the United States in 2011, MGMT invited their fans to throw their left shoe onto the stage to create a more psychedelic atmosphere, let us say, with shoes. The fans liked the idea quite a lot, perhaps too much, because sneakers and sandals flew toward them, delaying their performance for several minutes. Actors who portrayed James Bond are forbidden from wearing tuxedos in all the movies they make after having played the famous agent. The idea seeks to prevent the public from associating that type of clothing too strongly with other characters. The black tuxedo became one of the most iconic images of the agent since the earliest films. Every year, more deaths are caused by donkeys than by airplane accidents. Although it may seem strange, accidents with domestic animals can be dangerous in some rural areas where people interact with them frequently. Donkeys, like other large animals, can kick with great force if they feel frightened or threatened, which explains why incidents occur despite their reputation as calm animals. A motorcycle that was dragged out to sea during the Japan tsunami of 2011 was found on a coast in Canada in 2012. The vehicle appeared inside a metal container that had crossed the Pacific Ocean with debris from the disaster. After identifying the Japanese owner, Canadian authorities managed to contact him and tell him about the surprising discovery. None of the members of the Beatles knew how to read musical notation. Despite this, they composed and arranged their songs by ear, testing ideas directly on their instruments during rehearsals and in the studio. To write more complex arrangements, they often worked with the producer George Martin, who did have formal musical training. If one tree were planted for every Coca-Cola sold, we could reforest the entire planet in just 3 years. The company sells billions of drinks each year in more than 200 countries, which gives an idea of the enormous scale of production and consumption of this brand worldwide. On average, 1 pound of French fries costs 200 times more than 1 pound of regular potatoes. The final price includes processing, oil, packaging, transportation, and branding, which greatly multiplies the value of the original product. In addition, during the frying process, potatoes lose much of their water, so several pounds of fresh potatoes are needed to produce a single pound of fries ready to sell. Scorpion venom is the most expensive liquid in the world, $38 million per gallon. This is because obtaining small quantities requires extracting the venom manually from each scorpion. It is used in medical and pharmaceutical research, especially to study treatments for cancer and neurological diseases. In 1970, Keith Moon, the legendary drummer of The Who, was involved in an accident while trying to get away from paparazzi. During the incident, his friend, who was also his bodyguard and driver, was injured and later died. The event deeply affected Moon, who always stated that it had been a tragic accident that happened in the middle of chaos. The actress Carey Mulligan and the singer Marcus Mumford were childhood friends but lost contact. Each found fame on their own, and they met again as adults by chance, and now they are married. In fact, when they resumed contact, they began writing letters to each other, something uncommon today. Mel Blanc, the voice actor who performed the voice of Bugs Bunny, was allergic to carrots. During recordings, he used to bite a carrot to create the character's characteristic sound, but afterward he had to spit out the pieces to avoid an allergic reaction. Graphene, the strongest material in the world, is 1 million times thinner than paper, but 200 times stronger than iron. It is made of a single layer of carbon atoms arranged in a hexagonal structure. Since its discovery in 2004, it has been studied for applications in electronics, batteries, flexible screens, and ultralight materials. At the beginning of their career, the duo Daft Punk used simple and somewhat unattractive masks to hide their appearance. It was not until the late 1990s, when they were recording the album Discovery, that they began using their characteristic futuristic robot look. That image eventually became a fundamental part of their artistic identity and their performances. The concept of rap battles has existed since the 5th century, when poets held events where they insulted each other in verse. The Norse god Loki is known for having insulted other gods in verse form. In Norse mythology, there is a story called Lokasenna, where Loki mocks and accuses several gods during a banquet, something very similar to a verbal duel. Caesar salad has nothing to do with the Caesars of ancient Rome. It was invented in a bar in Tijuana, Mexico in the 1920s. It was created by the restaurateur Cesar Cardini, who improvised the recipe with the ingredients available during a weekend with many customers. The original version was prepared in front of the diner and included romaine lettuce, egg, olive oil, Parmesan cheese, and croutons. The Sun takes 220 million years to orbit the galaxy, a journey it has completed only 20 times so far. This complete trip around the center of the Milky Way is called a galactic year. During the entire history of Earth, since it formed more than 4,500 million years ago, the solar system has completed only a few of these orbits. In 2002, artists turned telephone booths in Osaka, Japan into aquariums. Each booth was filled with water, fish, and decorations, transforming them into small artistic installations. The project sought to give new life to urban objects that were becoming obsolete with the popularization of mobile phones. The largest muscle in the human body is the gluteus maximus, meaning the buttocks. This muscle is essential for maintaining an upright posture, climbing stairs, running, and performing powerful leg movements. It also helps stabilize the pelvis when we walk or run, which makes it one of the most important muscles for human movement. Leonardo da Vinci was the first person to observe the curvature of the spine. Until that moment, everyone believed it was straight. Through his anatomical studies and dissections, he drew the spine with its natural curves and described how they help maintain balance and distribute the weight of the human body. His notebooks also show vertebrae drawn with great precision, anticipating many anatomical studies by centuries. The melody of the song Yesterday came to Paul McCartney in a dream, but since it did not have lyrics at first, Paul called it scrambled eggs, meaning scrambled eggs. For a time, he used that phrase as temporary lyrics to remember the melody while he searched for the final words that would end up becoming one of the most famous songs in history. There is 150% more caffeine in chocolate milk than in Coca-Cola. This happens because cocoa contains small natural amounts of caffeine and theobromine. Although the difference exists, in both cases the amounts remain relatively low compared to a cup of coffee. There are no clocks or windows in Las Vegas casinos, so that people lose track of time. This strategy is part of the psychological design of casinos, which seek to keep players focused on gambling for longer periods. By removing external references such as natural light or the time, it becomes easier for people to remain inside for many hours without realizing it. Eating spaghetti in Italy with anything other than a fork is considered very bad manners. In Italian tradition, spoons are not used to roll long pasta, although in some restaurants for tourists they are offered. The correct way is to twist the spaghetti only with the fork against the plate. The original lineup of Village People was recruited through an advertisement that said, "Macho men wanted, must have a mustache." The producer Jacques Morali was looking for singers with a very specific appearance to create recognizable characters such as the police officer, the cowboy, or the construction worker. The idea was to form a group with exaggerated figures of American masculine culture that would attract attention both visually and musically. The Disney movie Frozen caused an increase of 153% in searches for flights to Norway and an increase of tourists in hotels of 37%. The aesthetic of the fictional kingdom of Arendelle is inspired by Norwegian landscapes and architecture, which sparked the interest of many fans to visit the country. Because of the high sulfur content, the group of volcanoes Ijen in Indonesia can produce blue lava. In reality, the color comes from sulfur-rich gases that ignite when they emerge at extremely high temperatures. When these gases burn at night, they create a bright blue glow that makes the phenomenon appear to be lava of that color. The song Low by Flo Rida has sold 8 million copies, the same as Hey Jude by the Beatles. Wow. Well, it should be taken into account that when Hey Jude was released, there were less than half as many humans living on the planet Earth. 3,500,000,000 humans with better musical taste. In addition, at that time, sales depended on physical records, while today, digital downloads and streaming influence the numbers much more. The man who invented the revolving door hated opening doors chivalrously for women. His name was Theophilus Van Cannel, an American inventor who patented the mechanism in 1888. Besides avoiding that social gesture that made him uncomfortable, his design also helped control air currents and maintain the temperature inside buildings more effectively. There is an altar in Bangkok, Thailand, dedicated to a beggar. One day, a man went to pray there and later won the lottery. As a thank you to the beggar, he sent many dancers to the altar, which became a tradition. Now everyone brings sensual dancers to that place to attract good fortune. Several important scenes from the movie Braveheart had to be reshot because some extras were wearing watches and dark sunglasses. During large battle scenes, it was easy for modern details to go unnoticed at first, but they later became visible during editing, forcing the production to repeat shots to maintain the historical appearance. Celery has negative calories. The effort you make eating this vegetable burns more calories than it contains. Although it is not strictly negative, it does provide very few calories because it is composed mostly of water and fiber. The process of chewing and digesting it can consume an amount of energy similar to what it provides. In addition, its high fiber content helps create a feeling of fullness, which is why it is often included in diets to help control appetite. The African Union is planning to have a single currency across the entire continent, something similar to the euro. One proposed name for this currency is the Afro. The idea is part of a broader project that also includes an African central bank and greater economic integration among the countries of the continent. In 1999, a 4-year-old girl turned yellow after drinking too much orange soda. The case was reported by doctors who explained that excess drinks with colorings and beta-carotene can cause a condition called carotenemia. This makes the skin acquire a yellowish or orange tone, although it is generally not dangerous and disappears after changing the diet. Flowers can grow faster if they listen to music, and it is not that they have ears, it is because they feel sound waves. Some experiments suggest that certain frequencies can stimulate cellular processes in plants and improve the circulation of nutrients in their tissues, although the results vary greatly depending on the type of plant and the volume of the sound. Humans reached the moon before rolling suitcases were invented. The Apollo 11 mission occurred in 1969. while modern wheeled suitcases began to become popular in airports many years later, at the end of the 1970s. Jamie and Adam from the program Mythbusters worked on the special effects of the movie Cloverfield. Before becoming famous from the television show, both had long careers in the film industry creating models, controlled explosions, and other practical effects for different Hollywood productions. The former president of the United States, George W. Bush, named The Very Hungry Caterpillar as his favorite childhood book, but it was published when he was 23 years old, so it does not quite add up. The children's book was written by Eric Carle and published in 1969. It became one of the best-selling illustrated books in the world. Leo Fender, the inventor of the Stratocaster and Telecaster guitars, did not know how to play the guitar. However, he was an expert in electronics and radio repair. He listened carefully to the musicians who visited his workshop and used their feedback to improve his designs, which eventually revolutionized the modern electric guitar. The creators of the site The Pirate Bay once tried to buy their own island to create a country where copyright laws would not exist. The idea was to establish a kind of digital micronation where they could host servers without legal restrictions related to file distribution. They even discussed proposals to install independent data centers and communication systems, although the project never went beyond the idea stage. It costs more to buy a new car today than it cost Christopher Columbus to equip and undertake 3 voyages between America and Europe. In the 15th century, the costs of expeditions included ships, supplies, and crew, but even so, the amounts were relatively small compared with the price of many modern vehicles. Almost half of all babies in China are born by cesarean section. In some cities, the proportion has been even higher during certain years. Among the reasons mentioned are preventive medical decisions, preferences of some hospitals, and the possibility of scheduling the birth date, something sometimes related to cultural beliefs about lucky dates. The London Symphony Orchestra had planned to board the first and final voyage of the Titanic, but they changed ships at the last moment. The change happened because other musical commitments appeared, which ended up preventing its members from being on board the famous ocean liner when it sank in 1912. There is no red light at approximately 33 feet of depth underwater. This makes blood appear green in color. Red light is the first to be absorbed by water, which is why warm colors disappear quickly while blue and green tones penetrate more deeply. For this reason, divers and underwater photographers use artificial lights or special filters to recover the real colors that the human eye stops perceiving at certain depths. 10% of the Russian government's revenue comes from the sale of vodka. Alcohol has historically been an important source of tax income in the country, especially since the times of the Russian Empire, when taxes on vodka represented a significant portion of state revenue. During several periods of Russian history, the government even maintained monopolies over its production and sale to secure those revenues. There is a frog in Australia that fills itself with water like a balloon. Aboriginal people learned that if you gently squeeze one of these, you can drink its water. Ew! This species is known as the water-holding frog, and it can store liquid in its body during droughts. In desert environments, it buries itself underground and can survive long periods waiting for rain. The most expensive musical instrument in the world, a Stradivarius violin, was sold in 2011 for $15.9 million. Violins made by Antonio Stradivari in the 17th and 18th centuries are famous for their exceptional sound and their extreme rarity. Today, fewer than 700 authentic instruments survive. It is impossible to press a button on a controller more than 16 times in 1 second. Seriously, try it. If someone tells you they can do more, do not believe them. In informal tests and manual skill competitions, most people fall well below that number. Surpassing it consistently without mechanical help is extremely difficult, which is why many suspicious records usually involve modified controllers or turbo functions. More people have traveled to the moon than have descended to the deepest point of the ocean. 12 astronauts walked on the surface of the moon during the missions of the NASA Apollo program, while only a few people have reached the bottom of Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench, the deepest known place in the oceans of the Earth. A tablet with a full memory weighs a fraction of a billionth more than a new one. This happens because storing information involves organizing electrons inside the memory circuits. Although the increase in mass is extremely small and impossible to notice in everyday life, it demonstrates that physical information also has a measurable weight. In 1915, Charles Chaplin entered a Charles Chaplin lookalike contest in San Francisco. Not only did he not win, he did not even reach the finals. The story became a famous anecdote about impersonation contests, since many participants exaggerated the style of the tramp character, while Chaplin himself performed the role in a more subtle way. If you insert a disc from the first Xbox into a PlayStation 2, you can see an animated logo before it announces that it is not compatible. The console tries to read the disc as if it were a video DVD, and for a few seconds, an animation of the Xbox logo appears. After that, the system shows a message indicating that the format of the disc cannot be played. The woman who gave birth to the most children was Valentina Vasilyeva, who had 69 children during her lifetime. Her husband, Fyodor Vasilyev, later married again and had another 18 children, making him the father of a total of 87 children. According to historical records, many of these births were multiple births, including several sets of twins, triplets, and quadruplets. In the first month of its life, a silkworm increases its weight 10,000 times compared to its birth weight. During that time, it consumes enormous amounts of mulberry leaves, its main food. This accelerated growth is one of the reasons why silkworm farming has been so efficient for producing thread for thousands of years. There is an abandoned subway station beneath City Hall in New York where no train stops, but you can see it as you pass if you take the number 6 line. It is the old City Hall station, opened in the early 20th century and closed in 1945. It stands out for its elegant tile arches and skylights, and today it can only be briefly seen when the train turns around at the end of the line. Level 5 of World 5 in Kirby's Dream Land is a naked woman if you look at it from a general perspective. The shape can be seen when observing the complete world map, where the arrangement of the islands and paths creates a silhouette that many players interpreted that way. It is one of those curious details that was probably a coincidence of the design. If the Hogwarts School of Magic from the Harry Potter series were real, tuition would cost more than $40,000 per year. Some estimates based on the cost of similar British boarding schools suggest that education and lodging in a historic castle with specialized professors would be extremely expensive. Emma Watson said that filming the long-awaited scene where she kisses Rupert Grint in Harry Potter was a horrible experience because they consider each other like siblings. Friend zone. Both actors grew up together for more than a decade filming the saga, so they described the scene as uncomfortable and strange, even though fans had been waiting for it for years. A 12-year-old boy received a prize of $3,000 for finding a bug, meaning an error, in Mozilla's source code. The discovery happened within the bug bounty program that the organization maintains to improve the security of its software. These kinds of programs allow anyone who discovers vulnerabilities in browsers or applications to receive money if they report the problem responsibly. Tomb Raider Legend begins without an introduction scene because the developers forgot to make one. During development, it was decided to start the game directly with the action to maintain a faster pace, although many players thought it was a mistake or a missing scene. Wayne Allwine, the voice actor of Mickey Mouse, and Russi Taylor, the voice actor of Minnie Mouse, married in 1991. Both worked for Disney and ended up forming a couple outside the studio as well, which turned the voices of the famous characters into a real-life marriage. The names Toyota and Honda derive from Japanese words used to classify different types of rice fields. Honda can be interpreted as original rice field, while Toyota emerged as an adaptation of the surname Toyota, also associated with agricultural land. Both names reflect family and cultural roots that existed long before the companies became giants of the automotive industry. The second man to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel survived the fall, but later died because he slipped on an orange peel. His name was Bobby Leach, who performed the dangerous stunt at the beginning of the 20th century. Years later, during a visit to New Zealand, he suffered the fall that ended up causing a fatal infection. Due to the ban on Japanese imports to Korea after the Second World War, the Nintendo 64 was distributed in that country by Hyundai and was called Comboy 64. For several years, Nintendo used Hyundai as a local partner to sell its consoles in South Korea under different names, a strategy necessary to comply with the trade restrictions that existed at the time. If Barbie were life-sized, her measurements would be 39, 29, 33. Many studies have pointed out that those proportions would be unrealistic for a real human body, which has generated debates for years about the representation of body image in toys. Clint Eastwood is a certified pilot. Sometimes he arrives at film studios by helicopter to avoid traffic. The actor and director has been an aviation enthusiast for decades and has flown different types of aircraft. He also holds a license to fly fixed-wing airplanes, something he has mentioned in several interviews. A neutrino could pass through a block of lead 1 light-year thick and never interact with or be stopped by an atom. These subatomic particles almost have no mass and barely interact with matter, which is why trillions of neutrinos coming from the sun pass through your body every second without you noticing. The largest map in all video games belongs to the game Elder Scrolls II: Daggerfall. It is 4,000 times larger than the map of Skyrim. The world of the game covers a huge portion of the fictional region of High Rock and Hammerfell and was procedurally generated. This allowed the creation of thousands of cities, towns, and dungeons that players could explore freely. Alexander Graham Bell, the first man to patent the telephone, which is why he is called the inventor of the telephone, never called his wife or his mother because they were deaf. This situation also influenced his interest in studying sound and communication, since his family was deeply involved in the education of people with hearing disabilities. Human saliva contains a painkiller called opioorphin that is 6 times more powerful than morphine. This molecule was identified by researchers in the 21st century and works by inhibiting the breakdown of natural substances that reduce pain in the body. Although it is present in very small quantities, its discovery has sparked interest in developing new painkillers inspired by natural compounds. Brad Pitt tore his Achilles tendon while filming Troy, while playing Achilles himself. The injury happened during the filming of a fight scene and forced production to stop for several weeks. The actor had to undergo physical therapy and adjust some fight choreography when he returned to the set, which turned the accident into an ironic coincidence with the famous weak spot of the mythological hero. It is believed that Ditto is a failed attempt to clone Mew. This is because the two Pokemon have the same statistics, the same colors in their shiny version, and can use the ability to transform. In addition, both appear in the same areas within the first games, and Ditto can breed with almost any Pokemon, which has fueled this theory among fans for years. Pamela Anderson was the first baby born during the celebration of the centennial of Canada's independence. She was given the title of Canada's Centennial Baby. The birth occurred during the festivities of 1967, a year full of national events to commemorate 100 years of the Canadian Confederation. As soon as tiger sharks grow their teeth, they begin attacking and eating each other inside their mother's womb. This phenomenon is known as intrauterine cannibalism and also occurs in other shark species. The strongest embryos devour the weaker ones, which means that only a few survive before birth. The giant ceramic dog in Joey and Chandler's apartment in the series Friends actually belonged to Jennifer Aniston in real life. She had just received it as a gift, but the production team liked it so much that they used it. The object ended up becoming one of the most recognizable elements of the apartment in the early seasons, appearing in several background scenes. Final Fantasy VII began its development as a Nintendo 64 game, but it was changed to the PlayStation due to the memory limitations of cartridges. The game, which occupied 3 PlayStation 1 discs, would have required 13 Nintendo 64 cartridges. Iceland consumes more Coca-Cola per capita than any other nation. The beverage has been extremely popular in the country since the middle of the 20th century and can be found almost everywhere, from supermarkets to gas stations, forming a common part of everyday life. The human body has approximately 37 trillion cells. Each one is microscopic, but it contains DNA with enough genetic information to fill around 1,000 books of 600 pages if it were written in detail. Together, the DNA from all the cells in the body stretched out would reach astronomical distances, showing how incredibly compact genetic information is stored. According to one study, the most aggressive dog breeds are Dachshunds, Chihuahuas, and Jack Russell Terriers. Research based on owner surveys suggests that these small breeds tend to show behaviors such as growling, biting, or chasing more frequently. However, experts point out that training and environment influence behavior much more than breed. The photo on the cover of the album Silver and Gold by Neil Young was taken with the Game Boy camera, an accessory that turns your Game Boy into a monochrome digital camera. This small device, released in the late 90s, also allowed users to edit the images and transfer them to the portable Game Boy printer. 1 out of every 8 Americans has worked at McDonald's. The fast food chain is one of the largest employers in the world, and many people have their first job there. Over the decades, millions of employees have passed through its restaurants, making the company a common starting point for employment. The gold dissolved in all the oceans of the world has an estimated value of $475 trillion. However, the metal is so dispersed that extracting it would be practically impossible with current technology. On average, there are only a few parts per billion of gold in seawater. Approximately 75% of the world's population is lactose intolerant. The 25% who are not usually have ancestry from Northern Europe. This difference is due to a genetic adaptation that allowed some populations to continue producing lactase in adulthood, an enzyme necessary to digest the sugar present in milk. The first copies of Resident Evil Revelations for 3DS had a spelling error on the side of the game case. The title said Revelatance. The error appeared in the first physical copies distributed by Capcom, which turned them into curious collector pieces. In later versions of the game, and in new editions of the cartridge, the name was already corrected. Studies indicate that children laugh 300 times a day on average, while adults laugh only 17 times. Children are more optimistic, curious, and creative than adults. As we grow older, responsibilities and daily stress tend to reduce how often we express spontaneous joy. Only 2% of women describe themselves as beautiful. This figure comes from an international survey conducted in 2004 that explored perceptions of female beauty in different countries. The study showed that many women tend to judge themselves harshly, something that has been linked to cultural pressure and beauty standards promoted by the media. The Tesla Model S electric car received the highest ratings in safety tests. It even broke the machine that was supposed to crush it during one of the tests. This happened because the reinforced lower structure strengthened by the battery makes the vehicle very rigid, which surprised engineers during the resistance tests. It was planned that Bill Clinton, the former president of the United States, would provide the voice of President John Eden in Fallout 3, but they were unable to secure him. In the end, the role was performed by the actor Malcolm McDowell, known for his participation in numerous films and series. His voice ended up giving the character a solemn and authoritative tone that fit very well with the atmosphere of the game. A 99-year-old homeless man in Bulgaria donates all the money he collects to local orphanages. He has given as much as $24,000 in a single donation. For years, he walked through the streets collecting coins to support charitable institutions, becoming a highly respected figure for his generosity. In 1917, John D. Rockefeller could have paid the entire public debt of the United States by himself. Today, the entire fortune of the richest man in the world would only cover 2 months of interest. At that time, the federal debt was relatively small compared with the modern economy, while Rockefeller accumulated an enormous fortune thanks to the oil empire of Standard Oil. Today, government debt figures are so massive that they far exceed any individual fortune. The longest recorded hangover lasted 4 weeks. The record belongs to a man in Glasgow, Scotland. The case was reported by doctors after the man experienced prolonged symptoms following a night of excessive alcohol consumption, which turned it into an unusual medical curiosity. In the classic Nintendo game Punch-Out!, the Russian fighter Soda Popinski was originally called Vodka Drunkinsky, but the name was changed to avoid controversy. The change happened when the game was adapted for Nintendo home consoles, since the original name made a direct reference to alcohol and to stereotypes about Russians. A new scientific study shows that 8 out of 10 teenagers almost reflexively perform the Carlton dance when they hear music from It's Not Unusual, even though they have never seen The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The dance became famous through the character Carlton Banks, played by Alfonso Ribeiro, and over time it became a cultural meme that many people recognize even if they have never watched the series. Loch Ness is deep and long enough to contain the entire world population 10 times. Very tightly packed, but we would fit. This Scottish lake reaches more than approximately 656 feet in depth and contains more fresh water than all the lakes and rivers in England and Wales combined, which explains why its enormous volume has fueled stories and legends for decades about the famous Loch Ness Monster. There were so many lobsters in the 19th century that servants complained and had clauses in their contracts that prevented them from being fed lobster more than 3 times a week. At that time, they were so abundant along the northeastern coast of North America that they were even used as fertilizer or animal feed before becoming a dish considered a luxury. The damsel in distress that Mario rescues in the original Donkey Kong game is named Pauline. In the Japanese version, she is simply called Lady. Over time, the character disappeared from the series for several years, but she returned decades later in modern games like Super Mario Odyssey, where she appears as the mayor of New Donk City. An average human produces enough saliva during a lifetime to fill 2 Olympic swimming pools, 4 if you are a soccer player. The human body generates between 1 and 1.5 liters of saliva per day, which helps digest food, protect teeth, and keep the mouth moist. China banned time travel on television because authorities say it is a sign of disrespect toward history. Officials considered that many series altered historical events in fantastical ways or portrayed real figures in a frivolous manner. At the beginning of the 2010s, regulations were issued to limit this type of storyline on state television. In 2004, Google anonymously placed equations in advertisements in Harvard Square and Silicon Valley that led to a web page with another equation. If you solved it, it also gave you the opportunity to apply for a job. It was an unconventional way of recruiting curious programmers and mathematicians. The page led to a more complex technical challenge, and only those who managed to solve it could submit their application to work at the company. The white towers that appear when you turn on the PlayStation 2 vary depending on the number and size of the games saved on the memory card inserted in the console. Each tower represents a save file, and its height changes according to the amount of stored data. It was a very original visual way of showing the contents of the memory. The sound you hear when you crack your knuckles is not the bone. It is a gas bubble being released. When the joints are stretched, the pressure in the synovial fluid changes and small gas cavities form and collapse quickly, producing the characteristic popping sound. After this, the joint needs a few minutes for the gas to dissolve again in the fluid, which is why you cannot make the sound again immediately. A farmer in China bought and raised 2 puppies. Worried because they were killing and eating his chickens, he investigated and realized they were bears. They turned out to be Asian black bears, a protected species in the country. He had bought them thinking they were guard dogs, but when they grew and their behavior became more wild, forest authorities intervened and moved the animals to a conservation center. Babies hold their breath underwater by instinct until about 6 months of age. This reflex is known as the diving reflex and causes them to automatically close the glottis and hold their breath when water touches their face. Their heart rate also slows slightly. It is a mechanism inherited from our mammalian ancestors that helps prevent water from entering the lungs. The PlayStation was originally planned as an add-on accessory for the Super Nintendo that included a compact disc reader, but it was ultimately decided to make it a separate console. The disagreement between Sony and Nintendo led to the joint project being canceled, and Sony continued development on its own. The result was the first PlayStation, released in 1994, which would end up changing the video game industry. This substance appears solid, but it is actually a very viscous liquid that drips extremely slowly. It is part of an experiment that began in 1930. Since then, it has dripped only 9 times. The most recent was on April 17, 2014. Woohoo! The experiment uses pitch, a substance derived from tar that flows so slowly that it appears solid. 3 years of intensive education are required to become a police officer in Norway. The training takes place at a university, and each graduate receives a degree in police studies. During that time, students receive training in law, psychology, ethics, conflict resolution, and proportional use of force, reflecting the country's focus on prevention and community policing. Before becoming famous, the actress and model Natalia Vodianova sold fruit on the street with her mother to help her family escape poverty. She grew up in a modest area of Nizhny Novgorod in Russia and left school as a teenager. Years later, she was discovered by an agent and ended up walking the runway for some of the most important fashion brands in the world. The Sega Dreamcast was the first console to implement online play through a telephone line. The system was called SegaNet. The Dreamcast was released in 1999. It included an integrated modem that allowed players to connect to the internet to compete or cooperate with other people. Titles like Phantasy Star Online helped popularize this early form of online play on consoles. The album Smash by The Offspring has sold more than 11 million copies worldwide, making it the best-selling album of all time released by an independent label. It was released in 1994 by Epitaph Records and helped drive the rise of punk rock and popular culture during that decade. When anesthesia was invented in the 1840s, many people criticized it. They considered it an unnecessary luxury. How brave. Some doctors and religious leaders even believed that pain during surgery was natural or morally correct. Over time, successful operations without suffering demonstrated its enormous value, and anesthesia became a standard practice. The Sega Genesis had the same Motorola processor as the first Apple Macintosh computer. Both used the Motorola 68000 processor, although running at different speeds. Thanks to this chip, which was relatively powerful for its time, the Genesis could handle fast graphics and more complex games than many other consoles of its generation. The human heart creates enough pressure to shoot blood more than 30 feet. Each heartbeat pushes blood through a network of vessels that can reach tens of thousands of miles in length in the human body, constantly keeping oxygen and nutrients circulating. Jack Bauer, the main character in the television series 24, killed 112 people in the first 5 seasons of the show. The series is known for its intense pace and for unfolding in real time, which led the character to take part in numerous action scenes while trying to stop terrorist attacks throughout each season. The Xbox was the first system with support for high-definition televisions. Microsoft's console, released in 2001, could display some games in high-definition resolutions, such as 720p and 1080i, if the appropriate video cable was used. This was something ahead of its time, when most televisions were still standard definition. Elephants cannot jump. Unlike many other mammals, their legs are designed to support enormous weight, and they always keep at least one limb in contact with the ground when moving. Their bone and muscle structure favor stability and strength, allowing them to walk long distances without needing to jump. A computer technician from Great Britain threw away a hard drive that contained thousands of bitcoins when they were barely known, triggering extensive searches. The device ended up in a landfill, and for years, projects have been proposed to try to recover it, since the potential value of those digital coins could equal hundreds of millions of dollars. If you save the game during the fight against the boss, The End, in Metal Gear Solid 3, and return to the game 1 week later in real lifetime, the enemy will already have died of natural causes, and Snake will be able to continue normally. This character is an extremely elderly sniper, and the game takes into account the real passage of time on the console. When you return days later, a scene appears confirming that he died of old age. Your stomach has to produce a new layer of mucus every 2 weeks, otherwise it could digest itself. This protective layer covers the walls of the stomach and protects them from the strong acids and digestive enzymes that help break down food. In addition, the cells on the surface of the stomach are constantly renewed, which allows small damage caused by acid to be repaired and keeps the internal lining in good condition. A single zinc mine in Namibia uses 1/5 of the entire electricity demand of the country. It is the Rosh Pina mine, one of the most important mining operations in southern Africa. The extraction, crushing, and processing of the ore require enormous amounts of energy. Because of this very high consumption, mining has become one of the sectors that most influences the national electrical infrastructure. Your favorite song is probably your favorite because you associate it with an emotional event in your life. Music is processed in areas of the brain related to memory and emotions, such as the limbic system. That is why a song can instantly transport you to a specific moment, such as a trip, a relationship, or an important stage of your life. Even after many years, hearing a few seconds of that melody can trigger memories and sensations with surprising intensity. Nintendo had to spend more than $80 million to provide protective gloves to players who injured their hands playing the extreme minigames of the original Mario Party. Some games required rapidly spinning the control stick with the palm of the hand, which caused blisters and injuries in many players, especially in the United States. A man with a tattoo of the Liverpool Soccer Club that said, "You will never walk alone," had to have his leg amputated after an injury he suffered in Afghanistan. Without realizing it, the surgeons cut part of the tattoo that now says, "You will never walk." Interestingly, he later became a runner with a prosthetic leg and has participated in long-distance races. Helium is a non-renewable resource. At some point, it will run out. This gas is mainly formed by the radioactive decay of elements inside the Earth and is extracted along with natural gas. Because it is extremely light, when it is released into the atmosphere, it slowly escapes into space, which means it cannot be recovered. For his performance at the opening ceremony of the London Olympic Games in 2012, Paul McCartney was paid the impressive amount of £1. The musician accepted a symbolic fee because he considered that the honor of participating in the event was enough. He closed the ceremony by performing Hey Jude in front of millions of viewers around the world. There are 6 vehicles and approximately 55 short tons of trash on the moon, left by the Apollo missions. Dirty. Among those objects are lunar modules, tools, cameras, life support backpacks, and even bags with human waste. The astronauts left them there to reduce weight and be able to bring lunar rock samples back to Earth. Bread is not healthy for ducks. It can cause them diseases. Although many visitors and parks feed them bread, this food has little nutritional value for them and can cause digestive problems and malnutrition if consumed in excess. When they eat too much bread, they can feel full without obtaining the nutrients they actually need, which in the long term can affect their growth and their ability to fly. Scientists created a synthetic version of marijuana called dimethylheptylpyran that, when smoked, produces effects that last for 2 full days. This compound belongs to a family of synthetic cannabinoids developed in laboratories to study how these substances interact with the brain and the nervous system. Some of these molecules are much more potent and longer-lasting than natural THC. There was a song written in the 1630s that was only performed in the Sistine Chapel. The Vatican kept the composition secret for 150 years until a 14-year-old boy named Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart heard it twice, transcribed it from memory, and produced the first unauthorized musical copy of the piece. In Finland, traffic fines are calculated based on a person's income. This causes some millionaires in that country to pay up to 10,000 euros for running a red light. The system is called the day fine and seeks to ensure that the penalty has a similar impact on people with different economic levels. When you have a headache, drink water. Sometimes headaches are caused by dehydration. When the body does not have enough liquid, blood volume can decrease slightly, and this reduces the flow of oxygen to the brain. In addition, dehydration can cause tension in blood vessels and general fatigue. Drinking water regularly during the day helps maintain fluid balance and prevent this type of discomfort. In the 19th century, sausages were sold under the name mystery bags. Today they are still that, but now with another name. The nickname came from the fact that people often did not know exactly which parts of the animal were used to make them. Even so, sausages became one of the most popular street foods in Europe and America. The application Send Me to Heaven makes you throw your phone as high as you can. The creator of this application said that he made it with the purpose of destroying as many iPhones as possible, but it was banned in the App Store. They ruined the fun. The program measured the height reached by the phone using internal sensors before it fell back down. You burn more calories sleeping than watching television. During sleep, the body continues working to maintain vital functions such as breathing, circulation, and temperature regulation. In contrast, when a person is awake watching television, they are often completely still for long periods, which can reduce energy expenditure even further. There is a bar in New York that operates like the stock market every night. The price of drinks rises or falls according to their supply and demand. When many people order the same drink, its price increases. And when almost nobody buys it, the price drops, imitating the behavior of the stock market. The fastest rapper in the West, Ricky Brown No Clue, holds the Guinness record for rapping 723 syllables in 41 seconds in his song No Clue in January 2005. During the official test, he had to repeat the verse in front of witnesses and specialists who counted every syllable to validate the record. It is still possible to distinguish between East Germany and West Germany from space. This is because different types of street lamps were used. After reunification, many areas of the former East kept lighting with different tones for years, creating a visible contrast in nighttime photographs taken by satellites. The years on Mercury last the same amount of time as its days. This happens because the planet rotates very slowly on its axis and also takes a relatively short time to complete an orbit around the Sun. As a result, the time between one sunrise and the next on its surface is almost equal to the length of its year. The actress Stephanie Beatriz caused her characteristic eyebrow scar when she tripped over a Lego when she was 10 years old. The fall caused a cut that left the permanent mark that today is part of her appearance. Beatriz is known for portraying Rosa Diaz in the series Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Pharrell Williams is such a fan of Star Trek that his record label is called Star Trek, and he always uses the Vulcan salute to refer to it. The producer chose that name as a direct tribute to the science fiction series he watched from a young age, and the hand gesture became a kind of internal symbol among the artists of the label. The International Space Station costs more than 30 times its weight in gold. Its construction involved the cooperation of several space agencies and required dozens of launches over many years. It is one of the most complex and expensive structures ever built by humanity. There is a chili pepper grown in Japan called shishito, where 1 out of every 10 is very spicy, and there is no way to know which one. Most of these peppers are mild and slightly sweet, but occasionally one develops a much higher level of heat. Because of that, eating them often becomes a kind of culinary roulette. Since it was created, Guns N' Roses has had 21 full-time members. What the hell happened, Axl? You used to be cool, causing riots and everything. Over the decades, the band has gone through numerous lineup changes, with departures and returns of musicians who have kept the group's history alive. Before the Renaissance, 3/4 of all the books in the world were written in Chinese. For centuries, China had an enormous tradition of writing, printing, and preserving texts. The early invention of paper and woodblock printing techniques allowed many more books to be produced than in other regions of the world. Chris Pratt jokingly predicted that he would be in Jurassic Park 4 in a video from 2009, 5 years before he was cast. At that time, he was still a little-known actor. But years later, he ended up starring in Jurassic World, rebooting the famous dinosaur franchise. When Einstein published the theory of relativity, the newspaper New York Times sent the correspondent who covered golf to interview him. At that time, many newspapers still did not have journalists specialized in science, so they assigned any available reporter. Over time, the complexity of scientific discoveries led to the creation of sections dedicated exclusively to science. The members of Led Zeppelin came up with the name Black Dog for that famous song after a black Labrador entered the studio while they were recording. Good thing a goat or something like that did not walk in. The animal wandered near the Headley Grange studio in England and ended up giving its name to one of the group's best-known songs. On an island in Indonesia, if a baby dies before its teeth grow in, it is placed inside the trunk of a tree. The hole is sealed and the tree begins to heal. It is believed that the baby is absorbed. This funeral tradition is practiced among the Toraja and symbolizes that the child returns to nature. The song Chandelier is about the singer Sia's struggles with alcoholism. The lyrics describe a lifestyle of constant parties and the attempt to hide insecurities behind excess. The song became one of her biggest hits and was accompanied by a video that also explores that feeling of losing control. Elvis Presley did not write any of his songs and recorded more than 600. Although he rarely composed, he had a special talent for interpreting and adapting songs from different genres, such as gospel, rhythm and blues, and country, which helped turn many of them into worldwide hits. Only female mosquitoes bite, and they are attracted to the color blue twice as much as any other color. Females need blood to produce eggs, while males feed mainly on nectar. In addition to color, they are also guided by the carbon dioxide we exhale and by body heat. It is believed that there are 100,000 mountains under the sea. Only around 1,000 have been recorded. These formations are known as seamounts, and many rise thousands of meters from the ocean floor. Some even form islands when their summit emerges above the surface of the water. Il Divo has sold almost twice as many records as Foo Fighters. The operatic pop vocal quartet achieved enormous international popularity since the early 2000s, especially in Europe and Latin America. Their albums often sell in large quantities because they combine classical music with pop and versions of well-known songs. The difference between terror and horror is that terror occurs in anticipation of the experience of horror. Horror is when the pretty girl runs to escape the killer and save her life. In narrative terms, terror builds tension and expectation, while horror appears when the thing that causes fear is finally shown or confronted. The acronym CAPTCHA means Completely Automated Public Turing Test to tell computers and humans apart. This system is used on many websites to prevent automated programs from sending spam or creating fake accounts. It usually involves identifying distorted letters, selecting images, or solving small challenges that are easy for people but difficult for programs. Crews on submarines do not use the 24-hour day measurement. On a submarine, a day lasts only 18 hours. The schedule is usually divided into cycles of 6 hours of work, 6 hours of rest, and 6 hours to sleep or perform other tasks. This system helps maintain constant shifts in an environment where there is no natural light. Michael Jackson bought the rights to almost all the songs of the Beatles in 1985 for $47 million. Today, they are worth 450 million. The purchase included the catalog of Northern songs, which contains many compositions by Lennon and McCartney, making it one of the most famous and strategic acquisitions in music history. A white lion and a female white tiger had 4 cubs in 2013. They are the rarest big cats in the world: white lions, white ligers, and white tyans. These combinations are extremely unusual and usually occur only in captivity due to the mixing of species. Bees have 5 eyes, 3 small eyes on the top of their head and 2 large ones in front. The large eyes are compound and allow them to detect movement and colors such as ultraviolet, while the 3 small ones help perceive the intensity of light and assist with orientation during flight. Stevie Wonder partially lost his sense of smell in a car accident in 1973. The singer suffered a serious head injury when the vehicle he was traveling in crashed into a truck. He spent several days in a coma, but managed to recover and continued his musical career shortly afterward. There are no moles in Ireland. The island was never reached by this species after the last glaciation, so the animal simply is not part of its native fauna. This contrasts with Great Britain, where moles are quite common in fields and gardens. Because Ireland became isolated from the continent before these animals spread, they never managed to colonize the island naturally. The recorded voice of the inventor of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, was recovered in 2012 from a wax disc that had been created in 1885. Researchers used digital technology to read the recorded vibrations without damaging the fragile material, allowing his voice to be heard again after more than a century. The Japanese word karaoke comes from a phrase that means empty orchestra. The term combines the Japanese words kara, meaning empty, and oke, an abbreviation of orchestra. The original idea was for people to sing accompanied by recorded music without the presence of a live band. The Central Intelligence Agency reads more than 5 million tweets a day. Part of its work consists of analyzing public information on the internet to detect trends, events, and possible threats. This type of social media monitoring has become a common tool for modern intelligence agencies. In the time of the Roman Empire, salt was worth its weight in gold, and soldiers were sometimes paid with salt. That is where the word salary comes from. Salt was an essential resource for preserving food and for trade, which is why it had great economic value. Many ancient trade routes emerged precisely to transport this mineral. The real name of the veteran gangsta rap artist Ice-T is Tracy Lauren Merrow. He has 2 feminine names. The rapper adopted the stage name Ice-T inspired by the tradition of Iceberg Slim, a famous writer who influenced his style. With that name, he built a career that spans music, film, and television over several decades. Signals that impressed astronomers for 17 years, which they believed were extraterrestrial, were actually interference from the observatory microwave oven. Every time someone opened the microwave before it finished running, the device emitted a signal that confused the telescope instruments. Dave Grohl broke his leg during a Foo Fighters concert when he fell from the stage. He was taken to the hospital and returned to finish the performance a few hours later. During the rest of the tour, he sang while sitting on a specially designed metal throne that supported his injured leg while he continued performing. Ants make movements similar to those humans make when they wake up. They stretch and appear to yawn before beginning their daily tasks. Research on their behavior has observed that they perform stretching movements with their legs and mandibles after periods of rest. These movements help activate their muscles and prepare them for the activities of the colony, such as searching for food, caring for larvae, or repairing the anthill. Hundreds of years ago, people went to sleep early. They woke up for about an hour in the middle of the night to do various activities and then returned to bed for a second period of sleep. Historians have found references to this first and second sleep in diaries, literature, and European medical records from before artificial lighting. Katy Perry is tied with Michael Jackson for the record of the most #1 songs from a single album. The album Teenage Dream produced 5 singles that reached the #1 position on the Billboard Hot 100, matching the mark that Michael Jackson had established decades earlier with his album Bad. 10% of people do not like cilantro because when they eat it, it tastes like soap to them. This is due to genetic variations that cause certain people to perceive some compounds of cilantro differently, producing a sensation similar to the taste of soap. Research has pointed to variants in genes related to smell that cause certain aldehydes present in the plant to be unpleasant for some people. Russians do not have a single word for blue. only two different words that mean light blue and dark blue. In Russian, the colors goluboy and sinye are distinguished and considered separate basic colors. Some linguistic studies suggest that this difference makes Russian speakers identify variations of blue more quickly. Antarctica is a continent completely surrounded by oceans, while the Arctic Ocean is an ocean completely surrounded by continents. This geographic difference explains why the Arctic has floating ice over the sea, while Antarctica has an enormous continental mass covered by a layer of ice. The year after the United States Civil War ended, 20% of the budget of the state of Mississippi was spent on prosthetic limbs for wounded soldiers. Thousands of combatants returned with amputations after the fighting. State governments had to create special programs to manufacture and distribute prosthetics to veterans. The oldest mummy in the world is located in Chile. It is a child who is part of the Chinchorro culture mummies and is more than 7,000 years old. These mummies were created thousands of years before the famous Egyptian mummies and show that this ancient culture already practiced complex techniques of body preservation. As part of an experiment, 12 people pretended to have mild auditory hallucinations in order to be admitted to psychiatric hospitals. Once admitted, they began behaving normally, but 11 were incorrectly diagnosed with schizophrenia. The only people who realized they were healthy were the other patients. Musicians have the same life expectancy as citizens of Zimbabwe, the lowest in the entire world. Some studies about popular artists have suggested that lifestyles associated with constant touring, media pressure, and substance use can contribute to higher rates of premature mortality in the music industry. Fungi are more closely related and more similar to humans than to plants. At a biological level, they belong to a different kingdom and share certain cellular and metabolic characteristics with animals. For example, they obtain energy from organic matter instead of producing it through photosynthesis. More chimpanzees, gorillas, and bonobos are eaten by people each year than there are in zoos around the world. In several regions of Central Africa, there is an illegal market for wild animal meat known as bushmeat. This trade represents one of the greatest threats to these species, which already face habitat loss and poaching. Chuck Berry dreamed of becoming a professional photographer and only played music to buy photography equipment. Over time, however, his talent as a guitarist and songwriter made him one of the most influential figures in rock and roll, completely changing the direction he had imagined for his life. Music triggers brain activity in the same structure that releases the pleasure chemical dopamine, the same one that is released when you have sex or when you eat something you like. Studies using brain scanners have shown that even anticipating a favorite part of a song can activate these reward circuits. In London, there is a cereal cafe where you can eat hundreds of cereals from all parts of the world. The place became popular for offering curious combinations with different types of milk, toppings, and sweets, turning a simple breakfast into a rather peculiar gastronomic experience. To escape from the jaws of a crocodile, stick your thumbs into its eye sockets. It will let you go instantly, and you will be able to rethink your life and stop hanging around crocodiles. The eyes are one of the most sensitive areas of these reptiles, so they react quickly if pressure is applied. Just like humans, British cows make moo sounds with different accents depending on their region. Some researchers and farmers have observed that the sound can vary slightly depending on the environment and the group of animals they grow up with. It is a curious example of how even animals can develop regional vocal variations. After performing a concert in Antarctica for a group of penguins, Metallica became the first band to play on all 6 continents. The concert took place in 2013 near a scientific base and was transmitted through headphones so as not to disturb the local wildlife, making it a very unusual event in the history of rock. Beijing, Seoul, and Tokyo mean capital in their respective languages. Beijing means northern capital in Chinese, Tokyo means eastern capital in Japanese, and Seoul comes from an ancient Korean word that simply means capital or main city, reflecting their historical role as political centers. The strange music that plays in one of the scenes where the Joker appears in The Dark Knight was inspired by the sound made by a razor blade rubbed against a piano string. The composer Hans Zimmer used unconventional techniques to create a sense of tension and chaos associated with the character. Patrick Stewart had already lost all his hair by the age of 18 and thought that no woman would ever be interested in him. Over time, his appearance became one of his most recognizable characteristics as an actor. Decades later, he achieved worldwide fame portraying Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek. During the filming of the Shake It Off music video by Taylor Swift, The producers played heavy metal at very high volume outside the studio so that no one could hear the song before it was released. It was a way to prevent leaks while scenes were filmed in open spaces, since the single was part of a very secret campaign before its premiere. 69% of people in the back of an airplane survive accidents, while only 49% of those in the front survive. Analyses of airplane accidents have suggested that areas closer to the tail of the aircraft may offer higher chances of survival in certain types of impact. Natalie Portman did not attend the premiere of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace because she had to study for her high school final exams. At that time, the actress was still a student at a secondary school in New York and decided to prioritize her studies. Years later, she continued her academic education and graduated in psychology from Harvard University. An adult produces enough hydrogen in their urine each year to power a car for approximately 1,678 miles. This is because urine contains urea, a compound that can break down to release hydrogen. Some researchers have studied ways to take advantage of this process to generate fuel in a more sustainable way. Freddie Mercury loved cats very much, perhaps too much. At one point, he had 10 and gave them names such as Jerry, Tom, Oscar, Tiffany, and Delilah. He wrote a song for Delilah that appears on the album Innuendo, the last album by Queen before his death, and in his house he even had rooms dedicated exclusively to his pets. The handshake originally existed to confirm that the person you were seeing did not have a weapon. By extending the right hand, which normally held swords or daggers, both people demonstrated that they came in peace. Over time, the gesture became a universal form of greeting. The electric chair that was used to execute condemned prisoners, mainly during the 20th century, was invented by a dentist. The dentist Alfred Southwick participated in the development of the method after becoming interested in the use of electricity as a form of execution that was considered faster. 95% of all the information in the world is still stored on paper. Most of it corresponds to administrative documents, legal archives, historical records, and printed material. Although digital storage has grown enormously in recent decades, huge amounts of information still remain physically archived in libraries, offices, and government archives. When Last Night by The Strokes was released in 2001, everyone found the opening guitar part similar to the song American Girl by Tom Petty, who did not mind because he saw an interview where they admitted it and he seemed to like them because of it. Petty commented that these kinds of coincidences happen frequently in rock and said the song simply reminded him of his style. Sometimes whales let dolphins ride and travel on their heads just for fun. This behavior has been observed several times in the ocean and is interpreted as a form of social interaction between very intelligent marine species. Dolphins often take advantage of the movement of the larger animal to glide through the water with less effort, something similar to surfing a natural wave. A new species of owl is discovered approximately every 10 years. Many of these species are found in tropical regions or in little explored mountainous areas. Sometimes they are identified by differences in their song, their plumage, or through genetic studies that reveal that they were actually a different species. Andy Warhol always wore green underwear. The artist had many quirks related to his appearance and his daily routine. He was also known for keeping boxes full of everyday objects that he called time capsules, where he stored everything from letters and receipts to small memories from his daily life. Pete Townsend, the guitarist of The Who, has broken more than 90 guitars during his career, including 23 Fender Stratocasters, 12 Gibson Les Pauls, and 21 Gibson SGs. The habit began almost by accident during a concert in the 1960s, but it eventually became one of the most iconic images of live rock music. Greyhounds have a field of vision of 270 degrees. They can see objects that are behind them. This is due to the lateral position of their eyes, which allows them to detect movement very easily. This characteristic helps them react quickly while running, something important for one of the fastest dog breeds. If one day a crocodile chases you on land, run in a zigzag to lose it. Although crocodiles move surprisingly fast on land, they are not very agile. Their heavy bodies and short legs make sudden changes of direction difficult. In addition, these reptiles are better adapted to attack from the water, where their strength and speed are much greater than on dry ground. A guy named Eric Simons secretly lived in the headquarters of America Online for 2 months, eating for free, using the gym and showers, and sleeping in conference rooms while working on his own company. He had been accepted into an incubation program that was later canceled, but he decided to stay anyway. For weeks, nobody suspected anything because the building had thousands of employees. Listening to music while exercising helps you perform better. The effect becomes even stronger if it is the soundtrack from Rocky. Studies in sports psychology show that the rhythm of music can synchronize with the movement of the body, reducing the perception of fatigue and helping maintain effort for longer. Super Mario Bros. Was the first video game to have movies. In 1986, a Japanese animated film was released, and in 1993, another with live-action actors that, if it were not for the name, nobody would have known what the hell was going on there. The live-action version was heavily criticized for its strange story and its dark style, very different from the colorful world of the game. Kesha's song "TikTok" sold more copies than any single by the Beatles. Yes, this is where we have arrived. The single was released at the end of the 2000 decade and became one of the most downloaded digital songs of its time, driven by the growth of online music platforms and digital stores. 1 horsepower seems so weak compared with the true power of a horse because the unit takes into account the time when the horse rests. The term was popularized by James Watt to compare the power of steam engines with the work of horses used in mills and mines. The United States Air Force once built a supercomputer using 1,700 PlayStation 3 consoles. The system was built in the late 2000s, using the consoles connected in a network, taking advantage of their powerful processors to perform complex calculations at a much lower cost than a traditional supercomputer. The word school comes from ancient Greek and means free time. I think the meaning got lost over the years. It comes from the Greek word skole, which originally referred to time dedicated to rest, conversation, and reflection. Over time, that period of leisure became associated with study and philosophy, especially in the academies of ancient Greece. A man named Walter Summerford was struck by lightning 3 times during his life. After his death, his grave was also struck by lightning. Summerford was a British officer who survived several of these incidents in the early 20th century. Years after he was buried in Canada, a lightning bolt struck his tombstone and split it, fueling the legend of his incredible bad luck. The original Xbox was going to be called DirectXbox because of its use of Microsoft's DirectX technology, but later they realized it sounded very silly and simply named it Xbox. The name originated as an internal abbreviation among the developers, but it ended up being liked so much within the company that it eventually became the official name of the console. The Amazon rainforest produces 1/5 of the total oxygen on the planet Earth. This enormous ecosystem contains millions of plant species that perform photosynthesis and help regulate the global climate. In addition, its immense plant mass also absorbs large amounts of carbon dioxide. A female ferret can die if it goes a year without mating. This happens because females enter a prolonged heat and remain in that state until reproduction occurs. If the heat lasts too long, high hormone levels can cause severe anemia, which is why in captivity it is controlled through sterilization or breeding. Pepperoni originated in the United States. In Italy, pepperoni means bell peppers. There is no Italian salami called that. The cured meat used on pizza was created by Italian immigrants in America, who adapted recipes from traditional spicy salamis. Over time, it became one of the most popular pizza toppings in the United States. When the Pokemon Paris evolves into Parasect, it is actually being taken over by the mushrooms growing on its back, which control it and leave it like a zombie. That is why the absence of pupils. There are species of fungi in real life that do this to insects. A study suggests that if a cat falls from the 7th floor of a building, it has 30% fewer chances of surviving than a cat that falls from the 20th floor. This is because it takes a cat 8 floors to react and prepare for the fall. When it reaches terminal velocity, the animal relaxes, spreads its legs, and distributes the impact, which can reduce the severity of the fall. Fruit flies rejected by females consume larger amounts of alcohol produced by the same fruits than those that had a successful encounter. Laboratory experiments showed that rejected males seek foods with higher ethanol content. Scientists interpret this behavior as a stress response that alters their feeding preferences. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, had the idea of creating the pocket monsters after collecting caterpillars and observing how they turned into cocoons and butterflies. When he was a child, he liked collecting insects in the fields near his home in Japan. That hobby inspired him years later to imagine creatures that players could capture, trade, and train. 70% of boats sold are used for fishing. Many of these vessels are small and designed for recreational activities on lakes, rivers, or coastal areas, showing how popular sport fishing is in many countries. Colonel Sanders used to make surprise visits to KFC restaurants, and if he did not like the food, he would throw it on the floor and insult the employees. After selling his company, Sanders continued traveling across the United States as an ambassador for the brand. He was known for being extremely demanding about the original recipe and the quality of the chicken served in the restaurants. Pythagoras invented a cup that spills all its contents if you pour too much liquid into it. It uses the same principle as the mechanism of toilets. Inside the cup, there is a small hidden siphon that activates when the liquid exceeds a certain level. Then the contents empty completely, which supposedly served as a lesson for those who tried to pour themselves more than they should. The Super Game Boy, the accessory for playing Game Boy titles on the Super Nintendo, contained all the Game Boy hardware except for the screen and buttons. This was because the Super Nintendo was not powerful enough to emulate the games on its own. In reality, the cartridge functioned as a complete Game Boy console inside the accessory, while the Super Nintendo only handled displaying the image on the television and reading the controls. For a time, the composer and pianist Frédéric Chopin wore a beard on only one side of his face, arguing that it did not matter because the audience only saw his right side. The anecdote is often mentioned to illustrate the eccentric and perfectionist character that many contemporaries attributed to the musician. Chopin was very careful with his stage image and preferred to appear in profile while playing the piano. Russians held so many wild parties when the Second World War ended that all the vodka in the city ran out. After the victory over Germany in 1945, there were massive celebrations in several Soviet cities. Some historical accounts mention that alcohol reserves were quickly depleted because of the scale of the celebrations. Viagra tablets dissolved in water can help a cut flower remain firm for up to 1 extra week before wilting. Some experiments showed that small amounts of sildenafil can help keep open the channels through which water circulates inside the stem, which delays the wilting process in certain ornamental plants. When Zelda Ocarina of Time was re-released for the 3DS, Nintendo deliberately did not fix some errors, so the experience would be as similar as possible to the original version. Some small glitches and curious behaviors were kept because they were already part of the memory and experience of players who knew the game from the Nintendo 64 version. Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, also founded the themed restaurant chain Chuck E. Cheese. The idea combined food with video games and animatronics to attract families, becoming one of the first places where video games were a central part of children's entertainment. Adidas cancels any kind of sponsorship with athletes if they find out they have anything to do with the Church of Scientology. The company has had strict internal policies regarding associations that could affect its public image. In some cases, it has been reported that the brand avoids collaborating with figures linked to controversial organizations in order to protect its global reputation. Bullets fired from a sniper rifle can travel such long distances that the rotation of the planet Earth can move the target before the bullet reaches it. At extremely long distances, shooters must consider effects such as the rotation of the Earth, the wind, the temperature, and the curvature of the bullet's trajectory, factors that can alter the point of impact. The cruise ship Queen Elizabeth II moves only about 6 inches for every gallon of diesel it consumes. Large ocean liners require enormous amounts of fuel to move their immense mass across the ocean, showing how demanding maritime transportation can be. If you leave a jellyfish in the sun for too long, it evaporates. This happens because the body of a jellyfish is composed mostly of water. When it dries under heat, the gelatinous structure collapses and practically disappears. There are 5 categories of hurricanes. The slowest has the same wind speed as the maximum speed of a cheetah, while the fastest beats the most powerful roller coaster in the world with approximately 149 miles per hour. This classification is known as the Saffir-Simpson scale and measures the intensity of hurricanes according to the sustained speed of their winds and the potential damage they can cause. Currently, 1 out of every 20 injuries in soccer happens during goal celebrations. Uncontrolled jumps, slips, and risky flips have caused sprains, falls, and even more serious injuries. Because of this, some teams and coaches recommend more moderate celebrations to avoid losing a player over something that happens after scoring. Assassin's Creed began development as a Prince of Persia game called Prince of Persia: Assassin, but they preferred to turn it into an original game. The developers wanted a protagonist who acted independently instead of protecting a prince, which led Ubisoft to create a new franchise set in historical conflicts. There are 50,000 earthquakes on the planet each year. and 100 lightning bolts strike every second. Most of these earthquakes are so small that only specialized instruments detect them. As for lightning, it forms from the buildup of electrical charges in clouds during storms, releasing enormous amounts of energy in fractions of a second. There are around 1,200 species of bats in the world, and none of them are blind. In fact, most have good vision in addition to using echolocation to navigate in the dark. Bats represent nearly one-fifth of all mammal species on the planet and play a key role in pollination and insect control. Only 3 WWE wrestlers use their full birth name. They are Brock Lesnar, John Cena, and Mark Henry. Most wrestlers use stage names created by the company to build more memorable characters. In these cases, their real names were already distinctive enough, so they remained unchanged in their professional careers. There is a supercomputer that belonged to the United States Air Force, made from 1,760 PlayStation 3 consoles connected together. The system was used for research tasks such as satellite image processing and complex data analysis, taking advantage of the powerful cell processor of the console. Hershey's Kisses are called that because the machine that makes them looks like it is giving kisses to the conveyor belt. Kisses means kisses. When the chocolate is deposited onto the belt, it produces a small movement and sound that reminded people of a kiss, which inspired the name of these famous candies. Life has existed on the planet Earth for 80% of the time since it formed, and has been present practically since the moment the temperature stabilized. The oldest fossil evidence of microorganisms is more than 3,500,000,000 years old, which suggests that life appeared relatively quickly after the surface of the planet cooled enough. On a flight from Hong Kong to London in 1995, 2 surgeons used a clothes hanger hook, brandy, and a plastic tube to operate on a patient with a collapsed lung and managed to save him. They improvised a valve to release air from the passenger's chest while the airplane continued flying, stabilizing him until he could receive proper treatment after landing. Charles Martinet, the actor who provides Mario's voice, also voices the dragon Paarthurnax in Skyrim. Oh, mamma mia! Martinet has worked for decades portraying several characters in the Mario universe, including Luigi, Wario, and Waluigi, which made him one of the most recognizable voices in video games. China is the legal owner of all pandas in the world. Even pandas that live in zoos in other countries are usually on loan as part of diplomatic and conservation agreements, informally known as panda diplomacy. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, the trophy of Princess Daisy had a mysterious eye behind her head. This gave rise to all kinds of macabre theories. In reality, it is a small error in the three-dimensional model of the trophy, something many players discovered when observing the object from unusual angles. In the early stages of development of Half-Life 2, it was planned that there would be a friendly alien that would follow Gordon Freeman and eat the bodies of the enemies he killed. But it was abandoned because it would be complicated to program. Half-Life 3 confirmed. Human eyes never grow, while the nose and ears never stop growing. In reality, the eyes reach almost their adult size from childhood, while the nose and ears seem to grow because cartilage changes with age and the skin loses elasticity. People who speak more than 2 languages tend to change personality when they change language. Psychological studies have shown that language can influence the way someone expresses themselves, their sense of humor, or even the way they describe emotions. This happens because each language is associated with different cultural contexts and experiences. Violence has declined throughout history. We are currently living in the most peaceful era in the world. Although conflicts still exist, historical studies show that rates of homicide, wars between major powers, and deaths caused by violence have decreased significantly compared with many periods of the past. In Driver 3, there is a character wearing a Hawaiian shirt named Timmy Vermicelli, clearly a parody of the Grand Theft Auto Vice City character Tommy Vercetti. They gave him floaties as a mockery of the inability to swim of the Grand Theft Auto character. In the early games of that series, if the protagonist fell into the water, he died immediately. Forrest Mars and Bruce Murray invented M&Ms. The 2 letters M come from their last names. M&M is called that because his real name is Marshall Mathers. It has nothing to do with it. Now you can die peacefully. The candy appeared in the early 1940s and became popular because its sugar coating prevented the chocolate from melting in your hands. The Chupa Chups logo was designed by Salvador Dali. The famous Spanish surrealist artist created it in 1969. At the request of the founder of the brand, Enrique Bernat. Dolly drew the daisy shape in a single session and suggested placing the logo on the top of the candy so it would always be visible. It is currently believed that only a few people in the world still live with an iron lung, a machine created in the 1920s that helps breathing through negative pressure. These devices were mainly used to treat patients with poliomyelitis before modern ventilators existed. Most disappeared after the introduction of the vaccine developed by Jonas Salk in 1955. Star Ocean: Second Evolution has 100 different endings. It holds the record for being the game with the most possible endings. These endings change depending on the relationships between the characters, the decisions made during the story, and who ends up traveling together at the end of the adventure, which encourages many players to complete the game several times. The set used for Sherlock Holmes's house in the 2009 movie of the same name is the same set used for Sirius's house in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Film studios often reuse large sets to save time and money, modifying decorations and details so they appear to be completely different places. The wingspan, meaning the distance from wing to wing, of a Boeing 747 is greater than the first airplane flight of the Wright brothers. The famous flight of 1903 lasted only a few seconds and traveled a little more than 100 feet, while the distance between the wings of that modern aircraft exceeds 200 feet. Elizabeth, the widow of Sir Walter Raleigh, kept the decapitated head of her husband with her in a velvet bag for 29 years. Raleigh was executed in 1618 by order of King James I. According to historical accounts, his wife kept the embalmed head as a memento until her own death. The popularly horrible game E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the Atari 2600 sold more units than Space Invaders, the most popular game on that console. E.T. sold 1.5 million, and Space Invaders only 1 million. The game was developed in just a few weeks, and its commercial failure led to thousands of unsold cartridges being buried in a landfill in New Mexico. The shortest war was the one between Zanzibar and England in 1896. Zanzibar surrendered after 38 minutes. The conflict began when a new sultan took power without British approval, which triggered a brief naval bombardment that quickly ended with his surrender. A 75-year-old person, on average, has spent 6 years of their life dreaming. This happens because we dream mainly during the REM stage of sleep, which repeats several times each night. Although many dreams are forgotten upon waking, the brain remains very active during that period, processing memories, emotions, and experiences from the day. According to a Nintendo guide from the early 90s, Yoshi's full name is T. Yoshisaur Munchakoopas. This fact appeared in official promotional material and manuals related to Yoshi's Safari. Although it is rarely mentioned within the games, this name became a popular curiosity among fans of the Mario series. Astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin ate roasted turkey wrapped in aluminum foil as their first lunch on the moon. The food was specially prepared for the Apollo 11 mission and packaged in containers designed to prevent crumbs from floating inside the lunar module. More pure gold can be recovered from 1 short ton of computers than from approximately 18.7 short tons of raw gold ore. This is because many electronic devices contain small amounts of gold in their circuits and connectors, since it is an excellent conductor and does not oxidize. For that reason, electronic waste recycling has become an important industry for recovering valuable metals. Polar bears are practically invisible to thermal cameras. This happens because their thick layer of fat and dense fur work as an excellent insulator, preventing body heat from reaching the surface. As a result, the external temperature of their fur is very similar to the Arctic environment, making it difficult for infrared sensors to clearly detect their silhouette. The school in the game Silent Hill 1 is based on the school from the movie Kindergarten Cop with Arnold Schwarzenegger. The building used as a reference was the elementary school that appears in that 1990 movie. The developers took its structure and adapted it to create a darker and more disturbing version within the game. Mosquito repellent spray is actually just a smell that female mosquitoes cannot stand, something like Axe. Substances such as DEET interfere with the receptors they use to detect carbon dioxide and other human compounds, which makes it harder for them to find a person. 8 out of 10 people bite the heads off gummy bears first when they eat them. This small habit has been observed in surveys and informal experiments about eating behavior. Some theories suggest that people start with the head because it is the part we identify as the character, while others believe it is simply the easiest place to start biting. A Russian company wants to build a bridge between Alaska and Russia. If that happens, it would be possible to take a taxi ride that could drop you off in London from almost anywhere in the world. It would be a bit expensive, but you would arrive without drowning. The idea involves crossing the Bering Strait, which separates Asia and America by about 50 miles at its narrowest point. If built, it would connect the road networks of both continents and allow travel by land from America to Europe and much of Asia. According to the instruction manual of Super Mario Bros., when the Koopas invaded the Mushroom Kingdom, they turned all the people into stone blocks. This explains why Mario can break some blocks during the game. According to the manual, many of those blocks are actually transformed inhabitants of the kingdom, a curious detail that is not mentioned directly within the game. When we speak, we spit more than 300 microdroplets of saliva per minute, 2.5 microdroplets per word. These tiny droplets usually evaporate or fall quickly, but they can carry microorganisms, which explains why speaking very close to other people can help spread respiratory diseases. Aristotle had a slight stutter. Some historical accounts mention that he had mild difficulty speaking, although that did not prevent him from becoming one of the most influential philosophers of ancient history. He was a student of Plato and later the teacher of Alexander the Great, and his writings covered subjects such as logic, ethics, politics, biology, and metaphysics, influencing Western thought for more than 2,000 years. Trinity College at the University of Cambridge has more Nobel Prize winners than the entire country of Italy. Founded in the 16th century by King Henry VIII, the college has been home to historical figures such as Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell, and Bertrand Russell. Its scientific and academic tradition made it one of the most influential intellectual centers in Europe. A king penguin named Lala lived in the city of Shimoda in Japan after being rescued from a fishing net. Because of the warm climate, he had his own air-conditioned room. He became famous because he walked around the neighborhood wearing a small backpack so that fishermen at the market could put fish inside for him to carry back home. The Reznor enemies in Super Mario World are named after Trent Reznor, the vocalist of Nine Inch Nails. The Koopa Kids also have names inspired by famous musicians. For example, Ludwig von Koopa is inspired by Ludwig van Beethoven, and Iggy Koopa references Iggy Pop. Nintendo used these musical references as small cultural nods within the game. 400 Quarter Pounders with cheese can be made from a single cow. An average cow can produce hundreds of hamburgers depending on the weight of the animal and how much of the meat is used for grinding. Not all of the animal's meat is used for hamburgers, since many parts are reserved for other cuts. But even so, the total amount of available meat can be quite large. Tom Sawyer was the first novel written on a typewriter. The author, Mark Twain, used one of the first commercial machines to prepare the manuscript of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, published in 1876, marking an early moment in the use of this technology in literature. Jeff Daniels was paid only $50,000 for his role in Dumb and Dumber, while Jim Carrey was paid $7 million. The producers initially did not want Daniels because he was known for dramatic roles, but Carrey insisted that he was perfect for the character. Over time, the film became a cult comedy and one of the biggest successes of the 1990s. The largest riot recorded at a sporting event occurred in the Byzantine Empire in the year 532 during chariot races in Constantinople. Supporters of rival teams caused a massive uprising known as the Nika Riot, which left tens of thousands of victims. The games Pokémon Gold and Silver were going to be the last in the popular franchise. During their development for Game Boy, the Game Freak team even included almost the entire Kanto region in addition to the new Johto region, practically doubling the size of the game. Their enormous commercial success and the response from fans convinced Nintendo to continue the series. A Starbucks hot chocolate has 78 grams of sugar, the equivalent of 2 cans of soda, and 500 calories. That is more than a Big Mac. Many beverages prepared in coffee shops contain large amounts of added sugar, especially when they include whipped cream, syrups, and whole milk. In 1900, all the mathematical knowledge in the world could be written in only 80 books. Today, it would fill more than 100,000. Since then, the number of mathematical papers and theories has grown explosively in universities and scientific journals. Today, there are enormous academic databases dedicated exclusively to cataloging new proofs, formulas, and entire branches of mathematics. Elizabeth Taylor's permanently lined eyes were due to a rare genetic mutation that caused her to grow twice as many eyelashes. This condition is called distichiasis and produces a second row of eyelashes that grows very close to the natural eyelid line. In her case, this feature emphasized the contrast of her famous violet eyes and gave the impression that she was always wearing eyeliner. In Japan, in 1997, an episode of Pokémon aired that included a scene with very intense flashing lights. This caused hundreds of children across the country to feel ill and require medical attention. When the incident was reported on the evening news, fragments of the scene were shown again, which caused more people to experience the same symptoms. The concept of Sonic emerged because the creator of the series, Yuji Naka, was trying to finish the first level of Super Mario Bros. As fast as possible. That idea of speed inspired Sega to create a character whose gameplay would be based on running through levels at very high speed. The final design of the Blue Hedgehog debuted in 1991 and quickly became Sega's main mascot. Many claim that the pilots in the Star Fox series are not wearing silver boots as we might think. In reality, they all have to amputate their legs and use robotic legs, so the brain does not lose blood and they do not faint from the intense G-forces they are subjected to.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and share it with your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss more interesting content. Leave your comments and click on any of these videos. See you next time.